Teachers have read it. How easy is it to tell if a student has a crush on another? And what is the funniest or saddest moment between the two you can share? Story 1. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately, the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this guy, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. Middle school is tough, man. Story 2. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery. And I had the presentation staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class, visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched her like everyone else as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room. And after a few seconds, she seemed to stretch out forever. One of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class as tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is, to this day, one of the bravest acts I've ever witnessed. Story 3. My son, who is 5, has a crush on a 6-year-old at his school. She says she loves him too, and she's around him all the time. He told me just yesterday that he wants to build a 3-bedroom house with a room for him, a room for her, and a room for the baby they're going to have. I asked if he did not want to share a bedroom with her, and he said, "A boy needs his space." Story 4. I can definitely tell, and I always sit the awkward shy ones with their crushes. Some would call me a guardian angel. Story 5. In my high school, there was a rumor that the teachers would talk in their break room and try to pair people up in their classes for prom, although they didn't do anything for me, so screw them. Story 6. In class on Sunday, a 5-year-old boy said to a girl, "Kylie, your eyes match the flower in your hair." One of the cutest things I've ever heard. She smiled and blushed. The guy next to me looked over at me and said, "That kid has got moves." Story 7. Daycare teacher to kids 6 to 11 here. It is probably one of the easiest things to pick up on. They try to play with each other, but they don't openly admit to it. They spend a lot of time near each other, without ever actually talking to them. They sit at the same table, but try to talk to different friends. Basically, they spend as much time with each other as possible without actually becoming friends. If anything about crushes is mentioned, they immediately try to direct the conversation so people talk about them and their crush. And the second the two are mentioned together, the crusher blushes. Not to brag, but I have this 10-year-old that has a pretty obvious crush on me. I mean, I'm a teenage male who spent 20 hours a week with her, so it's entirely understandable. I should mention that I don't encourage it or anything. I treat her like all the others. Granted, she's one of the oldest, so she does have more responsibility and she's able to have deeper conversations. But she tries to make my life easy. She'll help clean, cook, and take care of the younger kids. She does it to impress me, and I sincerely appreciate it. I'll say again that this is completely normal. I had crushes on babysitters, and so do we all. I feel kind of bad for her now, because she puts a lot into it. But I know she'll smile looking back on it as an adult. There's another kid who is 6, or maybe 7 now, who has a crush on one of the 9-year-olds. I mean, they're not entirely on the same level mentally. 1st grade and 3rd grade are about as far apart as 3rd grade and 9th grade. Night and day. So it is kind of sad because he's chasing after her. She knows, I think, about the crush, and it makes her a little uncomfortable, but she's sweet about it. Story 8. I teach 16-year-olds. When a girl likes a guy, she'll draw hearts on his notes. When a guy likes a girl, he'll draw weens on her notes. That might be the greatest thing I've read in this thread. Hey guys, just a little side note, if you like my content and love listening to my stories, please press the subscribe button and click on the notification bell so you'll get notified of my future uploads. Thank you. Now back to the stories. Story 9. A couple met in my high school chemistry classroom. This was 3 years ago. It was a junior in high school, she was a sophomore. They told me last fall that when the date is set, I'll be invited to the wedding. The best example of chemistry ever. You could say I was the one teaching chemistry, but actually it was them who taught me it. Story 10. This actually happened in my acting class just today. Our teacher said he had an exercise to show us how much subtext there is under the surface of our actions. Pick a person in here who you have something you desperately want to say something to and never could. Think about it really hard and don't make eye contact with them or they'll know. Everyone in the class knows each other very well. There's a lot of dirt to stir up. The silence was deep and uncomfortable. Now go ahead and say it. You could hear the bumholes pucker. People looked numb with fear and hesitation. The teacher, having proved his point about rich subtext, opened his mouth to end the exercise before anyone could actually speak. Now, just then, a kid jumped from his chair arduously and let loose with, "Sadie, you're hot as heck and I want to sleep with you." The room exploded. The result was pandemonium. One kid was laughing so hard he nearly tipped his desk right over onto the floor. The teacher was in shock. The kid was red in the face and laughing uneasily. The amazing thing was the girl. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge it, nothing. She sat there, stock still like Marie Antoinette at the guillotine, totally above the situation. I think she must have been mortified and didn't know what to do. The teacher's response, I've been doing that exercise for decades, and no one has ever actually said anything. The next day, I kid you not, saw this kid and Sadie walk in today, a little apart, both grinning. He was listening to a song on her iPod. They both fell asleep in class. Great success. Story 11. I work in a college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It is painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who's sleeping with someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. It wasn't even a student, just some guy who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl he saw at Jack in the Box a week earlier. He comes in and just starts talking to her. I'm in such shock that this guy just randomly walked in. I was speechless and just stood there watching it. After about a minute, I came to my senses and realized the situation. Here's this 40-plus-year-old dude tatted up with his pants hanging from his butt, reeking of booze and cigarettes at 9 a.m., hitting on a very uncomfortable-looking tiny blonde 18-year-old. I tell him that this is my classroom and that I wouldn't have him interrupting. He would have to go. He didn't put up a fight. He just asked when class was over so he could come back to mac him some. I told him we were out at noon. We were really done by 10 and that was the last day of class. The day of the final a week later, in a different room, I kept my eyes open, but he never showed. I asked the student, but she only knew him from a single instance of standing in line in front of him at Jack in the Box. Story 12. Shout out to my high school econ teacher for noticing that me and a girl were into each other, constantly putting us in the same group, straight up asking the girl if she had a boyfriend while I was in the room. Story 13. Depends on the age, but the signs are obvious as hell. Lots of staring and not so obvious, but very obvious attempts at being near them. Visible disappointment when they aren't put in the same group for group work. Jealousy in all forms. I've seen a kid hate a classmate for weeks because that classmate sat next to the kid's crush for a morning meeting. Story 14. Computer science or computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10 to 1 in my lecture groups. This has resulted in some odd scenarios. My favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman, who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this, but they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots, so the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away. Like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them, honest to God, vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her but terrible for me. I found the fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. Story 15. I'm a substitute teacher and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was a 2nd grade class. I picked up the kids from the yard after recess and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl, asking for her side of the story. The conversation went something like this. Me. Jose was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl. We were playing. Me. You said you were chasing him. Is that true? Girl. Slight blush. Yeah. Me. Do you think he wanted you to be chasing him? Girl. No. Me. If you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Girl. Huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. That's adorable. Story 16. Miguel asked me, the AP Chem teacher, if he could write a message on the board for Mariella. Miguel was a former AP student and at the time a senior. Mariella was just a current AP student and at the time a junior. Miguel, using elements from the periodic table, asked Mariella to go to the senior banquet, the biggest to-do at our school. And then Miguel asked if I would record it on my phone while he asked her. I said sure thing, and I was glad to help. Both were great people and good students. Miguel, during class, goes into this big, long show asking Mariella. After he's done, Mariella stands up, looks straight at the phone and says, no. She then sat back down. Before this started, I thought there was no way Miguel would endure public humiliation unless he knew for sure Mariella would say yes. As soon as she said no, there was nothing but silence. Miguel literally dropped his head and slinked out of the room. Mariella didn't flinch. I die laughing every time I watch that video. Greatest moment of my teaching career. Pobre Miguel. Story 17. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. Once she just flat out said, do you guys like each other or what? To these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days, they were dating and still are. That could have easily resulted in them being super embarrassed and avoiding each other forever. Story 18. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright, sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush. Matthew's my boyfriend, or let's get married, Julia. They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. Little kids, no shame, all game. Story 19. I teach 10th graders. When I was a student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked and the students told me a lot of personal stuff. Probably because my age made me more approachable to 15 or 16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period, along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my classroom at the time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out or tell her about things he was interested in so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period in their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just C, S, and I in the classroom. C was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk, part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shooed S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through her embarrassment, and by the time S got back, C was cool as a cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation, and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. Story 20. It is painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some of the things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person, body language that positions the person closer to the other person, interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with, being helpful, more so for a person than for anyone else in the class, flirting, obviously, boastful storytelling. A lot of times it is outlandish and very obviously untrue, hanging around the other person uninvited, and checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What is funny is that most people think they're being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seemed so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. Story 21. High school teacher. Depending on the kids' personalities, they either get louder or quieter when their crushes are present. The loud ones are freaking annoying. The quiet ones are the ones that would purposefully sit next to their crushes. Story 22. Oh man, the longing stares across the room. The almost creepy, wistful what-ifs you can just see in their eyes. When I was in middle school, that was me. This sounds like every guy in the bar after 1:30 a.m. Story 23. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly obvious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girls never realize a guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. Story 24. I wasn't a teacher, I was a teaching assistant. It was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head while fiddling with an object like a pencil or their hair. A quick look away when the crush looks at them. It's easy. Story 25. The band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blooming. More often than not, it is a good thing, but every now and then you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy does it turn ugly quickly. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest, most shocking moment. A girl who is an awesome student has been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far as to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching kids practice. This sweet girl comes into the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watched her walk up to the said guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something, to which he responds with a short answer but has that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then balls up her fist and socks the guy 4 to 5 times and storms off. At that point, I realized what she said. Teach, you're going to have to write me an office referral. Story 26. I always thought that it was incredible that I always sat next to the girl I liked. It all makes sense now. Story 27. Teacher of high school freshman year. It's very easy. It was a couple of years ago. Girl was quiet, charming, and very bright. Boy was disruptive, but the good kind of disruptive. The pleasure to have in class disruptive, very funny. It became very clear to me that she was crushing on him something fierce. I, for what it was worth, blessed this potential union. This went on for several months. Then one day she storms into my room in a huff, declaring her anger at him. As I'm going around the room later that day, I catch him writing a lengthy letter to her. At a glance, it explained how he thought she was a really nice girl and all, but it would be perhaps best if they remained only friends. I assumed she made a move. It didn't play off. Over the next few days, I saw more mournful and longing looks than I ever wanted. Each one broke my heart. By the end of the year, they had patched it up. Yet, I still caught the occasional twinge of sadness in her eye. She may still hope to this day. And I still hope too. I think I just read a premise to an animated film. Story 28. One time in elementary school, I found this deceased possum at recess. Wasn't playing dead, actually dead. I think it died of some sort of possum disease. You know, the kind that possums get? Anyway, I picked it up by the tail and threw it at a gaggle of girls at recess. They gave their required shrieks and ran like the wind. A teacher got wind of it and told me to go inside and wash my hands. Didn't get in trouble or anything, just got told to wash up. Well, it turns out one of these shrieky girls started paying me more attention. At the end of the school year, someone wrote anonymously in my yearbook, "You're cute," in typically girlish scrawl. Turns out it was one of the girls that got possum thrown in her direction. Now, I didn't like her, I didn't have a crush on her. I just saw a dead possum and wanted to toss it at a target, and this pack of girls was the closest thing around. Apparently, she saw this as a super romantic schoolyard show of affection. I do not recommend you do this as an adult, though. Women don't find the tossing of roadkill in their general direction as amorous. Solid advice in today's dating world. Story 29. I'm not a teacher, but in 6th grade, 2002, a girl in my class, history with Mrs. Thompson, sat in the next row over from me every day. I was crushing on another girl and ignorant of the fact that she liked me. Midwinter, Mrs. Thompson is handing back papers and stops between the two of us while glancing back and forth between the two of us and says something along the lines of, "I don't know who to give this paper back to, her first name, or Mr. my last name." Mrs. Thompson hands the paper back to her. She had been practicing writing her name with my last name so much in her notebook, apparently like many teenage girls do, that she had accidentally written it on homework she handed in. 6 years later at my high school graduation, a half dozen of my former teachers, including Mrs. Thompson, were sitting around talking with my friends and me and brought up the paper where a girl had written my last name on her paper. They found it cute and endearing and told other various stories of middle school love. A year and a half ago, I married that girl.